Mass rallies during campaigning for the next general election will be replaced by e-rallies and television broadcasts. And they are among measures outlined by the Elections Department if the poll takes place during Phase 2 of Singapore's COVID-19 reopening. The election hasn't yet been called, but is widely expected to be held soon. And for more insights, we're joined by Associate Professor Eugene Tan from the School of Law at Singapore Management University. So, Prof. Tan, as we heard there, physical rallies will not be allowed. Walkabouts and door-to-door campaigning as well is going to be limited to 5 per group should the GE be called during this phase 2, the coronavirus pandemic period. How will this change the way candidates engage with voters?
In substance, I don't think there will be any significant difference, right? The methods will obviously have to change because of public health concerns, right? So we're moving more towards contactless campaigning. That will become the norm. But I think the end goal of persuading voters, the end goal of trying to persuade a voter to cast a ballot in the favor of the candidate or party, that remains unchanged. And I think when you look at what this election is all about, we're having an election in the midst of what has been called the crisis of a generation. I think candidates and voters will be very keen to engage with each other in person. So I think in the end, much as the means will have to adapt to the circumstances, I think the end goal remains the same. And I think that will place a lot more demands on the parties and the candidates. They will have to campaign vigorously online, and they will have to walk the ground very much as usual, right? But this time, with all the health precautions in mind.
Hey, Professor Tan, in place of rallies, candidates will be given airtime for constituency broadcasts. Do you think this is a good alternative? It sort of takes away from the sort of fervour or atmosphere of a rally?
It does, right? So we are where we are. And so I think, there will not be a perfect substitute for physical rallies. But I see, the other means, such as the constituency political broadcast, which is something new, which will provide up to about easily 10 hours of airtime on national free-to-air TV at a minimum, that these are attempts, to ensure that the campaign messages of all political parties and candidates, will be able to be accessed by voters so that they can make an informed decision. So I think it recognizes, the legitimate concerns that parties have, with regard to how they can get their message out to voters, particularly those who may not go online. But ultimately, it really depends on parties and candidates. What do they make of all these various methods that are available before them?
Right. Speaking of those that will not be able to get these messages, these e-rallies, some are going to say that the older generation will not have access to that. So how can they then ensure that this segment of the population will not be left out during the rally campaigning period?
Well, we shouldn't underestimate, the Merdeka and Pioneer generation. I think quite a number of them are quite savvy online. But be that as it may, I think clearly that there is a need for candidates and parties to consciously reach out to, the different voters through walkabouts as well as door-to-door visits. I think these will matter immensely. Right? This is the only way, where candidates can have that personal outreach, to engage voters, that personal touch. I think, again, parties, even as they rely more on their own online platforms, so whether that's the websites or social media platforms, I think traditional media will continue to play an important role, right? Because that's one way that you can reach audiences who may not be so comfortable online. So here we're talking about television, radio, and newspapers. So I think, these are still very viable methods of voter engagement. But we must also remember that voters have a role to play, right? You can't expect voters to sit there. Voters can't expect themselves to sit there and for all the information to come in. They too will have to go out and find out what are the different manifestos, what are the candidates, what are they going to bring to the table. So ultimately, it's really an all-round effort.
Foreign interference as well is another concern that we've seen in elections elsewhere in the world. With a huge part of campaigning looking to be moved online, do you foresee any potential issues for us here in Singapore?
I think the threat cannot be underestimated, Steve. I think this is the second reminder from the Elections Department, about foreign interference. And I think it's quite clear, that there have been previous attempts to shape public opinion in Singapore. Those may not have taken place during the general election. But with this particular election moving online, I think there are real concerns about misinformation, disinformation campaigns, as well as cybersecurity threats. So I think it's important for parties, to put in place safeguards. So whether that's protecting, the information technology platforms that they're using, their online and social media accounts, as well as the management and storage of their data. And I think this idea of heightened vigilance would apply to voters as well. Because we will be swamped with lots of information, on WhatsApp and many other platforms. And the question is, do we exercise that responsibility, of not spreading false information? Making those informed choices, I think, will help to ensure, that this will be an election in which Singaporeans will be able to make up their minds, from an informed basis. And I think that's important, for Singapore and Singaporeans.
Prof. Tan, before I let you go, I have to ask you this question. How soon do you think GE will be held?
I think it's very soon. When you look at today's announcement, that's the second time in about 10 days that the Elections Department is urging parties and candidates to focus on modes of campaigning that would minimize large group gatherings. And when you look at what's happening and concerns about seizing the opportunity when the public health situation is improving, that I wouldn't be surprised if Parliament gets dissolved as early as next week. If not, then it would be the week after. So we are looking very much, at a mid-July general election, and this will be a very tough election because of the many demands placed on candidates, parties, and voters alike. But I think it's something that all Singaporeans are very much looking forward to.
Indeed. So first signal we when Parliament is dissolved. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Associate Professor Eugene Tan from the School of Law at Singapore Management University.